I had dirt from my wife's grave still on my shoes when the gravedigger grabbed my arm and told me the coffin was empty. That's where this story starts. Not with some big dramatic revelation, just a man in a borrowed black suit standing in the Georgia heat, looking down at red clay on his shoes and a stranger's hand on his arm. My name is Floyd Alderman. I'm 62 years old, retired private investigator. Spent 30 years in Atlanta finding things people didn't want found: cheating spouses, hidden assets, people who disappeared on purpose. I was good at reading situations, good at knowing when something was off. I did not see this coming. It was a Tuesday in late October. Oakland Cemetery, Atlanta. One of those afternoons where the humidity sits on your chest like a second jacket. I had just watched them lower a mahogany casket into a hole in the Georgia red clay. My wife of 35 years was supposed to be in that box. Iris Alderman, 60 years old, retired nurse. The woman who made coffee too strong and always knew when I was lying to myself. The woman I had built everything around. The service was small, maybe 40 people. Our daughter Claudia stood next to her husband Dorian the whole time, holding a damp tissue, not really looking at anything. Our pastor said the right words. People hugged me and said the right things. And then one by one they drifted back to their cars. I stayed. I always stay until the last shovel of dirt goes in. Old habit from the investigator days, you don't leave a scene until it's finished. That's when Mercer Finch grabbed my arm. He was the head groundskeeper. 60 years old, face like old leather. Hands that looked like they'd moved about 1,000,000 pounds of dirt in their time. I'd seen him working the perimeter during the service, didn't think anything of it. But the look on his face when he pulled me aside, that wasn't a groundskeeper being polite. His eyes kept cutting over my shoulder toward the parking lot, where Dorian was walking Claudia to his SUV. Then he leaned in close. "Mr. Alderman," his voice was barely above a whisper. "I've been waiting a long time to give you something. 20 years to be exact." I looked at him. "I don't know what you're talking about." He pressed a small brass key into my palm. The number 24 was stamped into the head. Then he reached into his overalls and handed me a sealed yellow envelope. Old paper, slightly brittle at the edges. My wife's handwriting on the front. Just 2 words. "For Floyd, your wife paid me a long time ago," he said, still watching the parking lot. "Sir, that coffin is empty. She paid me to bury air. Don't go home. Go to the Highway 85 storage complex, Unit 24 right now before you do anything else." Then he stepped back into the shade of a stone mausoleum and was gone. I stood there for probably 30 seconds, just holding the key and the envelope. Dorian's hand landed on my shoulder from behind. I hadn't heard him come back. "Floyd," his voice was smooth and even. "We should get Claudia home. She's exhausted." Dorian Kessel, 38 years old, successful architect, sharp dresser, good handshake, always the right thing to say. I had called this man my son for 11 years. I had shaken his hand at the altar when he married my daughter. Right now, his eyes weren't grieving. They were scanning, checking the perimeter the way I used to check perimeters. I noticed it and then told myself I was imagining things. That's what grief does. It makes you suspicious of everyone. "Give me a few minutes," I said. He held my gaze for just a beat too long. Then he nodded and walked back to the car. I waited until the SUV pulled out of the cemetery gates. Then I walked to my truck, locked the doors, and opened the envelope. Iris's handwriting. Seeing it felt like hearing her voice from the next room. "Floyd, if you're reading this, I did what I had to do. I'm not in that casket. I'm alive. I could not warn you beforehand. Your reaction had to be genuine because Dorian has been watching us for years. Everything you are about to learn is true. Go to Unit 24. The key opens the lock. I will explain everything." Iris. I read it 3 times. Then I did what any retired investigator would do before walking into an unknown location. I ran Dorian Kessel through every database I still had access to. It took 15 minutes in a gas station parking lot 2 miles from the cemetery. Surface level, he was clean, licensed architect, good credit, no priors, but I knew how to go deeper than the surface. There was a secondary phone number registered to an address in Columbus, Ohio. I traced it to a property bought 8 years ago. Joint ownership. The co-owner's name was Beverly Kessel. Same last name. I sat in that parking lot for a full minute, just looking at the screen. Then I drove to the storage complex. The Highway 85 storage complex sat off a service road past Riverdale. A long row of corrugated metal units behind a chain-link fence. The kind of place people rent when they have too much stuff and not enough house. The kind of place nobody looks twice at. A man was leaning against a black sedan near the front gate. Salt and pepper hair cut close. The build of someone who still ran 5 miles a morning, a badge clipped to his belt like an afterthought. "You're late, Mr. Alderman," he said, not unfriendly, just stating a fact. His name was Kent Holloway, 54 years old. FBI special agent in charge, Atlanta field office. He didn't offer a handshake. He flicked his badge open once, then nodded toward the rows of units behind him. "She said you'd be wearing the gray tie," he said as we walked. "The one from your 30th anniversary." I looked down. Gray silk. Iris had bought it at a small shop in Savannah. I hadn't even thought about which tie I put on that morning. "Where is she?" I said. He stopped in front of Unit 24. Nodded at the lock. I put the key in. It turned on the first try. The unit was not a storage space. 3 monitors running live surveillance feeds, one showing the street outside our house in Buckhead, one covering the cemetery we'd just left, one I didn't recognize. A tactical map of Atlanta covered the right wall, red pins everywhere connected by string. File boxes stacked under a metal desk, all of them stamped FBI classified in red block letters. The smell of fresh coffee and printer ink. Someone had been living and working in this room for weeks, and then I saw her. She was standing behind the monitors, backlit by the blue glow of the screens. Iris Alderman, my wife. The woman I had watched go into the ground 4 hours ago, she was alive. I don't have a good way to describe what that felt like. It wasn't movie-style relief where you run across the room. It was more like the floor shifted, like my brain refused to process it for a full 3 seconds. I reached out and grabbed her arm just to make sure she was solid. She said, "I'm sorry, Floyd, I'm so sorry." Her voice was steady. Mine wasn't. Kent stepped back and let us have the room. When I could think straight again, Iris sat me down and told me everything. She was not just a retired nurse. She had never been just a retired nurse. In 1991, she spent 14 months working undercover for the FBI inside a criminal organization called the Covenant. Logistics front, drug money, contract killings disguised as accidents. She built the case from the inside, documented everything, and when the time came, she testified. Her work put the organization's leader, a man named Howard Graves, away for life. But Graves had a boy, not his biological son. A kid named Dorian, 8 years old, who Graves had been raising since the boy was old enough to follow instructions. When the FBI raided Graves's compound in 1995, Dorian was there, sat in the wreckage while agents cleared the room, completely still, not crying, just watching. Iris saw him that day. She thought he was a victim. She signed the paperwork to place him in the foster care system. She thought she was giving him a clean start. She was handing Graves his replacement. Graves spent the next decade coaching Dorian through prison visits, encrypted letters, and lawyers who carried messages. He trained the boy to be patient, professional, and focused on one objective: find the Alderman family, get inside it, and finish what the Covenant started. Dorian took a new last name, built a real career as an architect, and waited for the right moment. He found Claudia during her sophomore year at Georgia State. She was 20 years old, studying pre-law, sharp as anyone I'd ever seen. Dorian was 25. He positioned himself near her social circle, let things develop slowly. 4 years of dating, 7 years of marriage, 11 years total, not one day of it accidental. Kent laid a photograph on the desk in front of me. Surveillance shot, grainy, taken from a distance. A college social event, 2014, Claudia laughing with friends, Dorian standing about 8 feet away, watching her. Not talking to anyone, just watching. He was assigned to her, Iris said. I stared at that photo for a long time. Then my phone buzzed, text from Claudia's number. I almost didn't look at it, but then I read it. "Daddy, Dorian wants to take me to the attorney's office tonight to sign some estate paperwork. He says it can't wait. I'll explain when I see you. Estate paperwork, the night of her mother's funeral, and a real estate attorney's office at 7 in the evening. I showed it to Kent. He was already moving. "That's not where he's taking her," he said. He pulled up a second file and set it on the desk. More photographs. A house in Columbus, Ohio. Dorian on the front porch in a t-shirt, no suit, no architect persona, just a man relaxed in a way I had never once seen him be relaxed, standing next to a woman with light brown hair and a 7-year-old boy gripping her hand. The boy had Dorian's exact jaw. The woman's name was Beverly Kessel. Same last name I'd found in the database at the gas station. The boy's name was Elliot. 7 years of marriage to Claudia. And a whole second family in Ohio the entire time. Beverly doesn't know any of this, Kent said. She thinks he's a traveling consultant. She's not part of it. She's a victim. I looked at Iris. She looked back at me without flinching. "I know," she said quietly. "I know what this means for Claudia. Then we need to move," I said. Right now, Kent was already reaching for his jacket. We tracked Claudia's GPS signal for about 35 minutes. Kent had a laptop open on the passenger seat of his sedan, the blue dot moving south through Atlanta traffic, then cutting east toward the river. Not toward any attorney's office. Toward the old port warehouse district on the Savannah River waterfront, loading docks, abandoned processing facilities. No foot traffic after dark. I knew that area. Worked 3 cases down there in my investigator days, the kind of neighborhood where a sound at midnight doesn't make anyone call the police. Then the dot stopped moving, sat still for about 90 seconds, then it disappeared. He killed her phone remotely, Kent said. I didn't say anything. There was nothing useful to say. Kent made 2 calls in quick succession. His tactical team was already staged 2 miles from the waterfront. 4 agents. They had been following Dorian's vehicle since he left the cemetery. Kent had been running this operation longer than I realized. He just hadn't needed to move until now. He handed me a vest before we got out of the car. Kevlar, low profile, heavier than it looked. He fitted an earpiece and clipped a small transmitter to my collar. You stay behind me until I say otherwise, he said. That's my daughter in there. I know whose daughter it is. Stay behind me anyway. Iris was already pulling on her own vest. She moved the way she moved at Unit 24, quick, precise, no wasted motion. Not the way a retired nurse moves. I had spent 35 years married to this woman, and I was still recalibrating who she actually was. I decided to deal with that later. There was a lot of things I was going to deal with later. The warehouse was a 2-story concrete and timber structure right on the water. Old cotton processing facility, probably 80 years out of use. The kind of building that should have been torn down a decade ago but stayed standing because nobody wanted to pay for the demolition. 1 main entrance facing the road, a service door on the east wall, loading dock in the back. Kent's team took the loading dock and the main entrance. Kent, Iris, and I went in through the service door on the east wall. It was unlocked. Not forced, unlocked on purpose, left open like an invitation. That told me Dorian knew we were coming. Inside, the space was massive and dark. The smell of river water and old timber and something metallic underneath it all. The ceiling was 3 stories up, lost in shadow. The only light came from a single industrial lamp hanging from a cable in the center of the floor, throwing a harsh orange circle, maybe 20 feet across. Claudia was in the middle of that circle. She was tied to a wooden chair, wrists bound with nylon cord tight enough that I could see the marks from where we stood in the dark, a gag across her mouth. Mascara tracked all the way down both cheeks. She had been there for a while. Long enough that the fight had gone out of her posture, she was slumped forward, not struggling. Dorian stood directly behind her chair, hand resting on the back of it like he owned it. 4 men stepped out of the shadows around the perimeter, rifles up. They moved the way people move when they've done it before. I counted your footsteps from the door, Dorian said into the dark. All 3 of you. Iris walked into the light first. I'll never forget the look on Dorian's face when he saw her. He had personally confirmed her death. He'd stood at that graveside, watched the casket go into the ground, reported back to Graves that the job was finished. And here she was, 10 feet away, alive, looking at him like he was exactly what she expected. He couldn't finish his first sentence. Just stood there with his mouth open for 3 full seconds. You were always playing the wrong game, Dorian, Iris said. Her voice was flat and even. You just didn't know it? Behind her gag, Claudia made a sound raw and broken. Her whole body shook when she recognized her mother. That sound hit me harder than anything else in that building. I stepped into the light beside Iris. I took the surveillance photo of Beverly and Elliot out of my jacket pocket and set it on the floor in front of Claudia's chair. She looked down at it. I watched the lawyer in her take over. That cold, processing stillness she gets when she's reading a deposition she doesn't want to believe but knows she has to accept. Then a laptop on a nearby crate lit up Howard Graves' live from a federal cell somewhere. Old man now, 68 years old, but the eyes were the same, flat and certain and completely without feeling. The video feed was pixelated, but his voice came through clear enough. You're stalling. He said it the way you'd tell someone they'd missed a meeting. I didn't spend 30 years on this so you could stall. Dorian's jaw tightened. I need more time. You don't have more time? The feed split. A second window opened. Live street view of a residential house in Columbus, Ohio. Beverly and Elliot's house. A man in a dark jacket standing near the front walk, holding a phone. 10 seconds, Graves said, or I make a call. The 4 guards shifted their rifles. The whole room went very quiet. I stepped forward, Dorian. I kept my voice low and even. Look at me, not the screen. Look at me. He looked up. You were 8 years old when they took him away. I understand what that does to a person. But Elliot is 7 right now, same age you were. If you do what that man is telling you to do tonight, you're going to spend the rest of your life knowing your son grew up with that. Is that the life you want him to have? Another generation running an errand for a dead man's grudge? Dorian's hand was shaking. The rifle carriers were watching him, waiting for a signal. Claudia knows how you take your coffee, I said. She stayed up with you when you had pneumonia 2 winters ago. Whatever the mission was, she was real. This room is real. Your son in Ohio is real. That screen is a ghost. Graves started counting 10, 9, 8. Dorian looked at Claudia, then he looked at the laptop. Then he reached into his jacket pocket, pulled out a zip tie, and locked his own wrists together. He held them out in front of him and set the gun on the floor. "Get my son out of Columbus," he said. "That's all I'm asking." Iris activated the device in her vest. An EMP burst. The laptop went dead. The guard's radio comms dropped. 2 seconds later, Kent's team came through every entrance at once. It was over in under 4 minutes. Kent's team took down all 4 guards without a shot fired. Dorian was cuffed and walked out through the loading dock. He didn't resist, didn't say another word, just kept his head down and let them lead him out. Kent cut Claudia's wrists free himself. She stood up, took 2 steps, and her legs gave out. I caught her. She went stiff in my arms for a second, that full-body flinch of someone who's been running on pure adrenaline and shock for hours. Then she just stopped fighting it and let me hold her up. She didn't cry. She was past crying by then. The paramedics were outside within 10 minutes. They checked her over dehydration, rope burns on both wrists, early signs of shock. Physically, she was going to be fine. The lead paramedic pulled me aside near the ambulance and used the word dissociative and said I should prepare for the next few weeks to be hard. I already knew that. At the hospital, Claudia wouldn't let Iris near her, not at first. When Iris reached for her in the hallway outside the trauma bay, Claudia pulled back not violently, just a small definitive step away, like a door closing. Iris stood there and didn't push. She just nodded once and found a chair in the waiting room. I sat next to her. We didn't talk much. There wasn't a lot to say that the silence wasn't already saying. The FBI worked through the night. Kent called me at 6 in the morning with the first numbers. 31 Covenant members arrested across 4 states. A $380 million financial ledger recovered from Dorian's firm servers, wire transfers, shell companies, the whole architecture of what Graves had been running. Enough to build a RICO case that would take years to untangle. Howard Graves was transferred to a Supermax facility within 48 hours. The man standing outside Beverly's house in Columbus was picked up by a local FBI unit before he reached the front door. Elliot was safe. Beverly was safe. Kent called Beverly himself that night to explain what her husband actually was. I don't know what that conversation sounded like. I didn't ask. Claudia checked into a residential therapy center outside Atlanta for 6 weeks. The first 2 weeks, she didn't want visitors. The therapist told us that was normal, that both Iris and I were connected to the trauma event in her mind, and she needed distance to start separating the people from the pain. So we stayed away and waited. Week 3, she started asking questions through the center's coordinator. Practical questions, legal ones, the kind of questions you ask when you're processing something by taking it apart piece by piece. She requested Dorian's FBI psychological profile and went through it the way she'd go through a deposition. That was her way, always had been. Week 4, she asked me through the coordinator whether Iris still had the blue gymnastics ribbon from the state finals. The one with the frayed edge from where she'd carried it in her gym bag for 6 months after winning it. I called Iris. She found it in a box in the hall closet inside of 10 minutes. I drove out to the center that afternoon and sat with Claudia in the garden. She looked better. Still tired, still guarded, but something behind her eyes had shifted, less hollow than before. "Tell her I want to have dinner," she said. "Just the 3 of us. But I don't want the version of her that made my school lunches and came to my recitals. I want the real one. I want to know who she actually is." I told her that was fair. Dorian sent a letter from federal custody about 8 weeks after the arrest. It wasn't long. 3 paragraphs, no excuses, no requests for forgiveness, just a straightforward account of what he'd been told to do and when, and one personal note at the end. He wrote that he had named his son Elliot after a name he'd heard me mention once in passing, a name from my own father's side of the family. He wrote that somewhere in the 11 years he'd spent with our family, he'd wanted to be part of it more than he wanted to finish what Graves had started. He just hadn't found a way out that didn't cost someone else everything. Claudia read it once. She sat with it for about 2 minutes. Then she asked me for a lighter. We burned it in the garden at the therapy center, just the 2 of us. She watched the ash settle into the grass. "I don't need his explanation," she said. "I just need him to be gone." That was the most like herself she'd sounded since the funeral. 3 months later, Howard Graves died in his Supermax cell. Natural causes. Kent called to let me know as a courtesy. I sat with that news for a while, waiting to feel something, some version of relief or satisfaction or closure. Mostly I just felt tired. 30 years of a man's hatred, and in the end he died the same way everyone else does. Alone in a room, running out of time. Things moved slowly after that, the way things do when they're actually getting better instead of just getting quieter. Claudia went back to her law firm on a reduced schedule in the spring. She started seeing someone, a history teacher named Julian Ware, steady and honest, the kind of man who tells you the truth even when it's inconvenient. She introduced him to us at a Sunday dinner in the backyard. He shook my hand and said he already knew everything because Claudia had told him. I liked him immediately. Iris retired for real this time, closed out her consulting arrangement with the FBI, shredded the last of her Unit 24 files, and planted a garden in the backyard she actually expected to see bloom. She and Claudia had dinner alone twice before I joined them. I don't know exactly what they talked about those 2 times. I didn't ask. That was theirs. We set up an informal education fund for Elliot in Columbus. Beverly accepted it after a few months for his sake rather than hers. He's a sharp kid. His teacher says he loves building things. I've been writing. Not cases, not reports, just the real account of what happened, cleaned up and organized into something a person could actually read. I'm putting it together for Elliot, not because he needs to know his father's mistakes, but because someday he's going to need to know that a cycle can be broken, that the man who was supposed to hand him a mission chose, at the last possible second, to lay it down instead. That counts for something. I want him to know it counts. Last Sunday, we had dinner on the back porch. Claudia and Julian, Iris and me. No phones on the table, no one watching the perimeter. Just food and the sound of the backyard at dusk and a conversation that didn't have a single thing hidden underneath it. I sat back and looked at them, 35 years. A funeral that wasn't a funeral, a storage unit full of secrets, a warehouse on the river. A brass key I still keep in my jacket pocket, not for any particular reason, just because it's the thing that started me moving in the right direction when everything said to stop. I turned the porch light on when it got dark. For the first time in a long time, I didn't check what was standing outside it. A note. This story is fictional, and certain details have been dramatized for narrative purposes.